Hello, my name is Janice B. Gordon, and this is Scale Your Sales Podcast. Welcome to Scale Your Sales Podcast, listed number 9 of 43 best podcasts for every sales professional. I am Janice B. Gordon, a customer growth expert, awarded the RevTech Strategies Award of 2014. In today's episode of Scale Your Sales Podcast, my guest talks about how it has been being a buyer in 500 plus deals and the kind of conversations that she has had that's enabled her to be a better sales leader and CRO. We talked a lot about being in the shoes of the various stakeholders and how you would present the value and return on investment, whether you're selling internally to various stakeholders or even externally. There's a lot to be learned. Today's guest talks about how it has been being a buyer in over 500 deals, conversations, that has enabled her to become a better sales leader and CRO. She shared a challenging experience in having to more or less pitch to sell, to be the champion internally for another seller, because that seller was never in the meeting, and how she approached it. And I thought there was a lot to learn from this experience, whether you're selling internally or selling externally, how you prepare and really understand and stand in the shoes of the various key stakeholders to make sure that you're presenting the information, answering their explicit but importantly implicit questions, how you can share the vision of the implementation so they can actually see this would work here. So you're going to absolutely love this user case, and it's so versatile as to how you can use it from a buyer and a seller's point of view. My next guest is 5-time startup operator, heart-forward leader, mother, startup advisor, and board member. She's founder and CEO of Ignite Consulting, a fractional GTM strategy and RevOps firm that partners with startups to install and scale a unified GTM foundation. Welcome to Scale Your Sales Podcast, Anne Pao.
Thank you so much, Janice. It's great to see you as always. Love the pink.
Thank you very much. I'm not normally a pink person, but there you go. I'm just like anything pink. It's, Barbie and all of that. It's generally not me, but
Yeah,
it
but
is
once in a while, one slips in there, right?
Exactly. It's nice to kind of mix it up a little bit, keep people on their toes, isn't it? So talking about keeping people on their toes, I absolutely love the story I've heard you tell about one of the challenges you had to convince a CFO on a particular supplier. And the reason why I want you to talk about this is because a lot of people, whether they're selling internally or selling externally, can really learn from your experience. So tell us more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was actually, I was the buyer in this particular case, but I was partnering with a seller, and then our economic buyer, the ultimate economic buyer, I guess I was probably more the champion, was the CFO. So
Yeah.
I was working in a startup, a mid to late stage startup, probably like Series D, C, DE, and they were really struggling with their cash. And so the CFO was definitely the most powerful executive, I think, of all the executives, and really kind of ran the show. And he was very much focused on CAC. And so I had joined, and we were looking at call recording software, revenue intelligence software, and they were evaluating a few different ones. And I purchased Gong a number of times. This was one that I was really passionate about. And I knew that we needed it based on what I was observing on the ground. So I was like a VP of RevOps and strategy for this organization. And what I was seeing was, not a lot of talk around value, inconsistent approach to deal management. Obviously, we had to really reduce our cost. And I had just done a massive analysis with my team around our close loss. And what came out of that was that we were losing north of 75% of our deals due to poor qualification. And this was the first time they'd really delved deep into close loss. And so we did a very robust analysis. I presented to the entire executive team. And shortly after that, we were considering purchasing this revenue intelligence tool. But I knew I can't talk about, what it's going to do for us for, yes, productivity matters, but I had to speak to something the CFO cared about. So I remember I got together with my rep and we started talking about what was happening internally in the business. So I said, we're really, really focused on CAC. That is the thing we have to anchor around. That is the thing that's going to get the attention of the most powerful exec. And we strategized, like, how do we connect this to something that he is aware of? And I was like, well, wait a minute. I just did this massive analysis. I've quantified what it is. I talked about what I think needs to happen. How can we use this platform to help us really do better qualification at the front of the process and train our teams on value? And so by anchoring on that, I was like, that's the thing that's going to make the CFO really sit up and pay attention when I present the business case. I'm a big believer that even if you're a seller, your champion, me in this case, needed to be the one who really owned the presentation, because that seller was not invited to any of those meetings. So I built the internal business case, but I said, help me put this in the language of the product. But then the thing that we did that was in addition to, here's the business case, here's the ROI that we expect. The ROI wasn't, just pulled out of the street, out of the sky. It was real ROI that had come from our own numbers. But I think the thing that really set the difference, and the seller told me this and the CFO, was I came up with I call it like a payback plan, which wasn't just, hey, we're going to buy this tool. This is the problem it's going to solve. And then in several months, we'll hopefully get the ROI, because my team was also responsible for implementing and scaling that software. I was so focused on how do I implement and scale any software and drive a lot of adoption. So I thought about, what are we going to purchase it for? What are the people I'm going to put around this? What is my training plan to ensure this really gets utilized so we actually have the ROI materialize? And it was a 2-slide deck. And I presented to the CFO. It got approved. We purchased the software.
Wow. And it just goes to show you really need to put yourself in the shoes of various stakeholders and make sure you answer to what's most important to them, whether it's internally or externally, and really do the homework, really do that work. And everyone's so busy, you've really got to make it easy. So it's a no-brainer decision that they're able to make, because they can see it visually. It just makes sense.
Absolutely. And I'll add one more thing, because when I was looking back at that slide recently, like without the numbers, but just because I was like, well, I need to save this framework for future state when I'm selling. And what really stood out to me that caught their attention, and that what I look for when I am buying, and what I encourage my sellers to look for in terms of how they steer the conversation, is specificity. Everyone can say some big ROI, 10x, 7x, but what are you going to do to make sure that that actually happens? Not what is the seller going to do, but what is your champion going to do? What are the teams going to do? And what that demonstrates, I think, is real buy-in. And I think that's a way to differentiate, to kind of de-risk the investment that an executive might think about. You have a plan that's going to make this successful, and it's not what some CSM told you, it's your plan.
Yeah. And really thinking about what is the implementation plan, putting a name to that. So it's very easy for them to visualize this is happening in our company right now, and being able to, identify who's responsible and what part they play. So you're actually giving them the whole vision and journey, aren't you? And making it really easy to see how it is actually going to happen. Love it. Absolutely love that story. And the reason why I wanted you to talk about it is because sometimes we don't go that extra step. Sometimes we don't put ourselves in the shoes of the buyer or the seller, the stakeholder, the champion, to really understand their needs and what they need and how they need to see the entire journey. So I absolutely love that.
Thanks so much.
So talking about buying, how has it been being a buyer in 500 plus deals, and really kind of having the kind of conversations that enable you to be a better sales leader and CRO?
Yeah, great. I think the number one word that comes is empathy. We talked about this, putting it in the customer's shoes. I've been a buyer in a CIO organization where we managed 200 plus applications at a $300 million business. I've been a buyer in like a public company, several $billion earlier stage in career, probably more like a champion, if I'm honest with myself, not a buyer, but very influential. I've been a buyer reporting into the CFO org. I've been a buyer reporting into a CRO org. I've been a buyer reporting into a CCO org. And I think as a result of that exposure before I then became my own CRO was I really started to understand how those executives think and what is really top of mind. And so I'm able to pull on that authentically with credibility when I'm talking now as a sales leader and really helping my teams think about discovery and kind of shaping, hey, you need to get to exactly as we were talking about, what is the thing that is most critical that is happening in their business? The other thing I was just talking to my sellers this week, I said, we need to be thinking beyond getting the deal done. I always say that as a buyer, I don't actually care about the sales side. I mean, I care about it because I have to make sure it's a strong one. And I bring along the other buyers, but I actually care about what's going to happen post sale. I have to care about how it's going to actually be successful, how this is going to mitigate risk, how this is going to change an outcome. So the thing that I tell my sellers is you need to deeply understand how the team or teams that you're selling into do their work. You need to understand what their day-to-day looks like, what their boss's day-to-day looks like, how the teams like integrate or maybe don't integrate, and then how you make their lives easier in terms of how they do their work. Because if you understand that and you can embed into that, then you're going to really not just manage the sale, but you're also going to manage risks with retention. No one's going to want to let you go.
And I love that you entered, no one's going to want to let you go, because if you're speaking their language and really understand what life is like for them, how do their processes work or not work, where are the disconnects, and then they really feel that you're part of their team. They really feel that you understand, and they do not want to let you go, because all of the work and energy they need to put into the next supplier to really get them to understand what it really is like in my shoes, in my environment. They do not want to let you go. And often you become the trusted advisor that they say, we know this is not your area, but we love you and trust you. Can you recommend someone just like you that's going to do the same kind of work for us, that's really going to understand our world? Can you recommend someone that can do that?
By the way, Janice, you just said the word trust, and that's another word that really came up. Empathy and trust. As a result of having empathy, leading from a place of empathy, putting that into practice, you build real trust. And I had exactly what you're talking about happen with one of my fractional clients. I've been working with them for several months. We have a great relationship. I am like their thought leader, their partner, their operations leader, their revenue strategist, and
everything.
Early stage startup, so you kind of have to do it. But at a certain point, we had stabilized it, and I said, okay, respectfully, I think I've done enough in terms of the impact, and I think that the more cost-effective decision for you in the stage of company that you're in would be to hire somebody now that can more like maintain this. And you can pay me to do that, but I don't think you should pay me to do that. Let me help you find the right person. And they were like, yes, please help us. Tell us who we think you need. Can we bring you back in if we need advice? And in the words of that CCO, it was, I need somebody who I can pass this to that I know is going to get the job done, that I trust, who is going to nurture it as if they're part of my team. And I think you can do that whether you're a fractional leader or whether you're a sales rep. The best sales reps that I worked with, I was giving that example of Gong. This person literally was in my backyard. Tell me more about what's happening in your business. Okay, like we were brainstorming. Okay, well, what if we do this? Like as if they were part of my team strategizing around how they were going to help me solve their problem. We weren't talking about the software at that time. And so that built such trust so much that yes, I gave that person my cell phone. Yes, they could text me at any time and I would respond because we had that foundation of trust.
Yeah, love that. Love that. So talking about finding the right people, where do you start? What are the kind of key things that you look for in either building a team or finding a key individual contributor to the revenue goals?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's going to be the softer skills that you look for, and then there's going to be the harder skills that you look for. When I think about soft skills, things that you can kind of just feel with respect to a seller. And I think back on all of the strongest sellers that I know, or account managers or members of a revenue organization. The thing that really stood out to me was they had a real hunger They had a real thirst, a real sense of urgency. You know, these people had full calendars. They were hustling. And I think about one seller that I worked with years back. Her name was Maggie. And this woman was the top seller, 400% to quota every single time. And that didn't stop her. She never sat on her laurels. She was like, I've got to win. And it wasn't just, I'm going to do it all on my own. She was like, which executive do I have to talk to? Who can help me get the deal done? Like, she was hungry and she was persistent and she would not stop. And as a result, she really got results. That's one thing that I look for. The other thing I really look for, and it is on the hard side, and maybe this is just more table stakes, but when I think back about the reps who were really exceptional, they got the basics just right. Table stakes were table stakes. And what I mean by that is, no one likes CRM hygiene, but if I look at somebody's pipeline and their deal dates are all over the place, their amounts out of sync, they don't have clear next steps, their contacts aren't loaded, they don't have a handle on that deal. There's no way. And I'm like, does that make them exceptional? No, it's baseline. For me, if you can't even do that, how are you going to do the hard things? And I think the best reps know that. I have to get that done so I can like move on. So that way I have a real handle on it. So that way, when I'm pulling in others for support, I am arming them with the most information out the gate so I can focus on the strategy. And that I think is another really core aspect. The other harder attribute that I'll look for, more quantitative, something more measurable from like a leading indicator perspective. Of course, you can look at, well, they hit quota all these different times. Great. That's a great track record. But what is the thing that I'm going to say? How do I know that's going to happen here? As they are starting to ramp, are they starting to generate pipeline? Are they generating consistent pipeline? Are they generating higher quality pipeline? Meaning like they're meeting with the right people. They understand that you have to be at a certain level. You might not get there right away, but if they go in and they're like at a user level, an influence level, they know who power is, they know who the decision maker is, they have a plan. And that leads to my last aspect, which is they are GMs of their business. They are GMs of their business. They are strong account planners. They have a perspective and a plan for how they're going to get to the key contact they need and how they're going to get the deal done. And as a result of being that GM, they're really guiding and managing the deal process versus letting it happen to them, which I see some of the less successful sellers being like, well, I reached out, they didn't reach out. So I guess, I'll wait to see. No. Not good enough. You're not going to make it. You need to guide that process and figure out a way to stay relevant.
Yeah, really love that. I find this very interesting when you mention that they're a GM of their own business and they've got to take responsibility for all of the results. And you often find there are those reps, they've got an excuse for everything.
You've all met them. Not my fault. It's the CRM. It's the rep who left. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. It's like as if you've never heard it before, whereas you kind of like that's just identifying them as a particular type of person that probably doesn't fit with the organization really. But that sales is such a hard job. You have to take ownership of it. And I love what you said about many of the kind of hard aspects of the job. And it's really about being consistent and being systematic. So the question I have about the soft skills area, many of those areas are innate. They're very difficult to measure. I mean, after all, salespeople, when you're recruiting, are great sellers, aren't they? They'll tell you everything. And we know past performance isn't, a predictor of future performance. The culture changes, the market changes, the size of everything changes, the product changes. So, that's not a predictor. But so much is on mindset, on those soft skills, but so much of that is not necessarily measurable in the traditional sense when you're recruiting. So how do you go about establishing, that they have the level of soft skills that you require?
It's a great question. One that I also did not mention that I think is really important that I think you can cultivate. I really think you can. Deep listening skills, the ability to listen well, to really pause. When I think about the best experiences, again, I talk about it as a seller and as a buyer. When I think about it as a buyer, allowing for the pause, really listening intently, leaning and remembering those specifics. And as a result of that, you feel very cared for. And so coming back to when I'm hiring, I'm hiring right now. I've hired for many sales reps, or I've been a panel interviewer. I've hired for CROs in the past when I was VP of RevOps and been in those final rounds. And first, really crafting a true capability-based interview process leading at the front before you get to those harder skills-based processes, maybe with a challenge or a homework assignment. I always like to say, I'm not going to hire a seller who cannot demonstrate to me that they can sell. So yes, you're probably going to do some discovery-based presentation because I really need to see it in action, right? But on the other side, on the softer skills, we really align with my leadership team, with HR, because it's going to differ based off what you're selling and based on the culture of the company and who your buyer is, right? What really matters in that relationship-based sell. So I work with one client right now where it is much more like in the foundation space, philanthropic space. It is a very different buyer than your SaaS buyer. And, their familiarity with technology is also very different. So we have to account for that in terms of the type of person that we bring in. To be honest, maybe the hustle, go hard tech approach might offset and really maybe even, I don't want to say offend, but really take back buyers. So we have to think about very authentically. But what I say is, all right, who is going to stress test their ability and leaning into how well did they listen? How curious were they? When you shared inputs about yourself, don't share everything. See if they tease it out. See which questions that they ask you as part of this. Because we're actually, it's an interview process is also a moment of discovery. And so we're kind of stress testing, how would they do this if they were treating this as a sales meeting, not to sell us something, but to learn about us as a prospect or as a company? And these are things that we bring into that interview process.
Yeah. And I was smiling because I can imagine you sitting in an interview, interviewing a candidate and pausing for a very long time and just watching them and seeing how comfortable they are with that space, whether they try and jump in and fill it, or they just sit back, relax, and wait for the next response. Because I actually think that would be quite a good test, really.
Yes. And actually, one thing I was thinking about, I share this question. So anyone who's interviewing with me is like, oh, she's going to ask me this. Yes, it's fine. I ask this question in every single interview that I do for any role. It tells me a lot about two things. So the question that I ask is, I obviously have their interview. I say, I trust my recruiters. They have stress tested you that you have the functional skills that we would need. I want you to tell me, when you look back on your career and you look at all of the points that you could have taken, a left or a right, juncture points, you took a right or a left, you made a decision, and those sets of decisions brought you to where you are now. Tell me what made you drive, what drove those decisions and those turns. And what I'm looking for is, how do they tell a narrative about who they are? And then it also tells me, do they understand the reasons why they did things? Have they reflected? And do they pause, or do they talk for 10 minutes straight? And I give them tell me in a couple minutes. And what you'll see is a lot of people will talk for 15 minutes. They didn't listen. They didn't listen for the prompt, And so these are things that really shape what an engagement would look like with them if they were buying something from me.
Yeah, and especially in a situation when you're a little bit nervous as well. And it's interesting you talk about listening over talking. OMG has done all of this research based on their data that listening over talking is 375% bigger predictor of sales success, a trait, a core competence for sales success over and above others. Now, this organization for the last 30 years has been doing assessments on salespeople from, senior leaders down to customer success. So they've got, 2.5 million assessments across, I don't know, 150 countries, 200 industries. So when you were talking about, SaaS is very different to, kind of not-for-profit, all of that, they've got all of that in their database for all of the different roles. And so there's certain, based on now this incredible sales-specific, predictive and verified data, I love it because of the research, real research you can do based on that data. That, we met at Pavilion, I spoke at their GTM conference last year. And this is one of the things that I was presenting about the data. And it's identified, you know, like we think of extroverts and introverts in terms of sales. And often what we think is going to be great for sales, the data has told us that isn't. And we wonder why a good 77% of people in sales should not be in sales, you know, or why managers are pulling out their hair because they're actually got someone in role that is not coachable. So actually identifying listening over talking, coachability, all of those, and much of these are those softer skills that make the absolute difference between success and failure, adaptability, resilience. You know, what is their overall outlook and how do they kind of bounce back? This is all based on, you know, that data that's been collected for years and years. And we know that, you know, the predictive effectiveness of resumes is around 20%, interviews around 20%. All of these things that we use in a traditional sense actually not great predictors of success. So that's why in recruitment we use this database and we, you know, tailor it to our needs, send out the link, the candidate will complete it, and it'll basically tell you before you've gone down the interview, before you begin to like them, before we use a lot of our bias, they'll tell you, are they going to be successful in your role or not?
Fascinating. I wrote some notes. I definitely want to have you ping me that study because I want to read.
Yeah, it's fast. I love data, and when I find things like that, and that's why I often do presentations and speak about it, because it's like we just don't know that. We think we have a sense, but actually when you've got that data that tells you this is how it is for salespeople, and we can, you know, it saves you a lot of time and energy when you know this is a fact and you can measure it. So, you know, I wanted to, you know, introduce that to you because it's a lot of what you already know and selling and, you know, in selling and buying and experience, how important coachability, you mentioned that, listening over talking, you mentioned that, but you know, this is really critical for people to be able to leverage, I think.
Absolutely. I love it. I'm going to read it and I'm going to evidence it and refer to it when I'm talking to my teams.
Right. That's what we want. Okay. So tell me more about your organization, your approach to working with your clients.
Absolutely. So Ignite Consulting, it's coming up on its year anniversary, which is quite exciting. I mean, I think it actually just happened, but I officially launched May 7th last year. So it's been a very busy year. We do fractional go-to-market, CRO, and executive RevOps consulting. So really anything from as early as seed stage all the way to, I'm talking with a public company right now, so all the way through to public, which is quite exciting. And I started it after 5 times operating as a head of VP revenue strategy, revenue operations for large organizations, more like mid to late stage, going up to IPO. And really the thesis that I had was these organizations would generally hire me in a turnaround situation, and we would turn it around. But a lot of what was spent was stuff that could have been avoided had they put the right structures in place. So my bet was, what if I formed Ignite and was able to partner with these organizations to build that foundation so that they don't have to, you know, be 6 months to a year too late, and we're not in a turnaround situation. They can avoid the turnaround and have a smoother like trajectory towards growth. So I work with them. We do anything from revenue strategy to, I like to say, despite the different stages that I work with these organizations, they all seem to have the same problems, which is fascinating, right? Which is good for me. It's good for me. And by the way, they're not all in SaaS. I've worked with SaaS. I've worked with creator economy. I've worked with nonprofit. I've worked with legal tech. You know, I've worked in not fintech, agro tech and climate tech. And they're all asking me like, hey, help us set up our go-to-market, help us set up our first sales process, help this not just from like a systems perspective, but a strategy perspective, help us align and get an operating cadence really going. Like, again, these core baseline table stakes things for a go-to-market org, help us align so that way we can really be talking about what we do in a consistent fashion, help us set up our funnel, help us measure what really matters, help us coach our team, help us hire our team. So it's kind of across the board, but I really, really enjoy it for the way that It allows me to look at the same problem with different nuances and different perspectives in different verticals and teams. I'm a deep learner. I always have been, and I like looking at problems from lots of different vantage points. So that's what keeps it exciting.
Love it. Absolutely love it. So glad that we met. And there's literally about 5 more questions that I'd love to ask you. So I'm next year or later on the year, I'm getting you on again. So and another invitation's coming your way because
I love it, Janice.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's wrap this up with, I always ask a topical question. If you're on a desert island on your own, what would be the one thing you take with you?
So this is a funny question. I would bring a satellite phone so I could call out and get picked up.
I'm shocked. You would not want that peace and serenity and, to kind of get to know, be at one with nature for a little while and space out, Anne?
Well, here's the thing. I guess when I heard I was at a desert island, I immediately thought I was stranded on the desert island. Not that like I had a way to get off it. So I'm like, well, again, what you're seeing there is my brain, like solution oriented. How am I get from India? How to get
exactly.
out of here, solve this problem? And so I'm like, I get a satellite phone. I'm going to get off this island. That's exactly what I'm going to do.
Exactly. That's what the question's for. It just sees how your brain works and you're a problem solver. You're constantly even if there isn't a problem, and you could have relaxed into it and had a free holiday, but no, you're solving the problem. I love it.
Yeah, after I answered that, I'm like, oh yeah, maybe it would have been nice to just hang out, but I don't know if are there crabs everywhere? Is there a nice place to lounge? I was imagining like a barren island that I don't want to hang out on.
Oh, fantastic. So, Anne, how can listeners get hold of you?
Yes, the best way you can get hold of me is connect with me on LinkedIn. I think you're going to post it, Anne Pao, ANNEPAO. You can also, if you're a revenue operations professional or sales professional looking more how to engage in the revenue organization, you can join my RevOps Village Google group. Just Google it, RevOps Village. And Anne.Pao at igniteconsulting.co, not .com.
All right. Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being a guest on Scale Your Sales podcast. We're definitely going to be seeing you again, Anne Pao.
So exciting. Thank you, Janice. Have a great one. Bye now.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Scale Your Sales podcast. If you like this discussion, feel free to listen to other episodes or watch the captioned show on YouTube and subscribe to future episodes. I would really appreciate it if you would leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you.